G'day guys, and today we're going to be having a look at the New South Wales election results. So we'll be looking at the Legislative Assembly results, which is colloquially referred to as the lower house. We won't be looking at the upper house because only 8% of the votes have actually been counted for that, whereas for the lower house, 81% of the votes have been counted. So we have a much better idea of how that's going to turn out. So let's head on over to this cool little PowerPoint that I've made up and have some fun with it. So first up, I've just included a map of the 2015 election results, just so we have a point of comparison between now and then. So if we have a look at 2019, we can see an outflowing of regional support for the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. Something to note is that 2 seats had by-elections, so they had elections in between 2015 and 2019. So we have Orange in 2016 going to the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party, and Wagga Wagga in 2018, just last year, going to an independent. Now, so far in the 2019 election, we've seen 4 seats change hands. So obviously we have those 2 large regional states going to the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. We have Lismore up north going to the Australian Labor Party, and we have Coogee down in the Sydney metropolitan area. Very small thing, I doubt you'll be able to see it between the comparisons, but it certainly is there, going to the Labor Party also. Just having a quick look at the history of these 2 electorates, we can see that Lismore has actually been a traditional National Party seat. It was taken by an independent between 1982 to 1988, but for a very long time, not since 1959, has it been controlled by the Labor Party. So what essentially has happened is there's been a 4.5% swing towards the Labor Party, and that has been enough to tip it over to them. Interesting. For Coogee, it's been a bit back and forth over the years. It kind of looks like a bit of a checker-marked election history. If we look at its more recent election history, such as within the last 50 years, we can see it's been held by the Labor Party from 1974 to 2011. It was then taken by the coalition last cycle, but has since been retaken by the Labor Party with a 1.7% swing. So it didn't take much for Labor to re-secure that seat. So that's all well and good, the major parties trading a few blows there. But what I really want to look at is the growth of the Shooters and Fishers and Farmers Party throughout New South Wales between the 2015 and the 2019 election. So if you have a look in 2015, we can see in several seats they obviously didn't bother to run anyone. And clearly they're not running anyone in metropolitan Sydney because essentially no one in Sydney cares about Shooters, Fishers or Farmers. As you can see on the map, they've had a massive upsurging of support. In Barwon, they went from 0% of the vote to 32% of the vote, with a 19.9% swing from the National Party to take that seat. In the Murray, they also had a bit more support, which is good to see. That also allowed them to take that seat with, I believe, a 26.3 swing to the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party, so quite a large swing there as well. But you can also see up north, in seats they haven't bothered to run in the 2015 election, they've had a significant amount of support. They're taking up 15% of the vote and good stuff like that. And also in Orange, where I used to actually live, and clearly I didn't notice this at the time, between 2015 and 2019, taking that seat in 2016 by-election, they've more and doubled their support. If we have a look towards the mid-south, we can see that they've fallen a bit in Wagga Wagga from 9.92% to 8.1%. Likely that's because some of their voters defected to that independent. All in all, I think this is a very good result, and it, as we'll see, will create a very interesting dynamic in the Australian Legislative Assembly. Now, just to give you a quick rundown on the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers, they appear, to my eye, to be sort of a conservative, right-wing populist group. They're interested in economic protectionism, social conservatism. They would be against the sort of LGBTQIXA stuff that's being taught in schools at the moment. But something that's very interesting to me is their support of gun rights. So obviously that's where the Shooters in their name comes from. If we check out their firearms federal policy, we can see that what they believe is, quote, "The Commonwealth Government has no constitutional authority for the legislation and regulation of firearms laws other than those which would apply to the Customs Act. Our firearms policies, federal and state, should be based on one fact: criminals do not obey the law. As such, the vast majority of our rules and regulations must be focused on the use of illegal firearms, not the persecution of law-abiding firearms owners." This is a very sensible outlook in my mind, as we see, such as the response in the things like the Christchurch shooting. When you attempt to ban weapons, ban semi-automatics, is a criminal or someone who wants to go out and murder people going to give up their gun? No. who's going to give up their gun? Well, a reasonable, law-abiding citizen. So all you're really doing is concentrating firearms into the hands of criminals and people who are going to go out and do horrible shit. You're not actually helping to keep anyone safe, although it does look incredibly good on paper. And in this sort of paradigm, it's very fashionable, almost sexy to say, for the government to go around banning things like that. Because, as I said, it looks very good on paper. So their action plan is to 1. Review the 1996 National Firearms Agreement of COAG. 2. Oppose the establishment of a Commonwealth Firearms Registry, or any other interference by the Commonwealth in the constitutional authority of the states to legislate the ownership and use of firearms. So I imagine they'd be against some sort of big list of who owns a gun and things like that. 3. Remove federal red tape regulations for firearm imports where relevant state and territory requirements have been met. So I imagine this would be something along the lines of waiting periods or additional tariffs and things like that when trying to bring firearms into the country. Like if you want your super cool American rifle, you're not going to have to go through a bunch of extra paperwork because of that. 4. Support and promote Australian firearm manufacturers and suppliers for domestic supply and government contracts. That's pretty cool. That increases competition within the market, of course. I'm not entirely sure who makes guns for the Australian military at the moment, but if it's just being handed out by a single supplier or a limited amount of suppliers because, you can't really manufacture guns within Australia anymore, it's not very profitable. Not as profitable as it could be, I should say. This could also reduce the cost of the Australian military because rather than just running to the same contract every time, you could have multiple contractors bidding for that government contract, which would drive down the cost of the contract itself and therefore reduce the tax burden on the Australian populace. And obviously I support the manufacturing and supply of domestic firearms, which goes into point number 5, which is expand self-defense rights and non-lethal means of protection. I don't know if you know this, guys, in Australia, but there's no castle doctrine, or you cannot actually own non-lethal means of protection. You can't own tasers and mace and that sort of thing. And they have this weird thing, I believe it's called reasonable force or reasonable self-defense or something. And essentially, if you're capable of retreating from a conflict, you should do so. So there are lots of cases in Australia where people have broken into someone's house and the owner has defended himself and then got in trouble for that sort of thing because he could have retreated, which is ridiculous. I think people have an inalienable natural right to self-defense, to defend their property and their bodies, and I don't think the government has any business interfering with that. I would like to see some sort of expanded castle doctrine in Australia rather than a duty to retreat. 6. Support and promote national education and safety programs for responsible firearms ownership and use. Yep, I don't have any problem with that. It seems to work in the States. I do not believe any member of the NRA over there has ever gone up and shot a bunch of people. So of course, if you're going to introduce a really easily potentially violent tool into society, we should of course be educating people in its good use. When I'm learning about even simple hand tools at the moment with spanners and things like that, at the job I'm at, they're teaching us, things like don't use a spanner with a rounded edge, don't use a spanner if it's got a crack in it, and that sort of thing. And that's just a spanner, it's not a gun. So absolutely, of course, if you're going to introduce firearms back into the population, you should be educating people on their safe use. 7. Increase funding to Shooting Australia. Now, I'm guessing that's some kind of non-government funded Australian shooting club or something. I haven't actually looked into that. Can't really comment. 8. Introduce mandatory sentencing for Commonwealth firearms offences. Now, I guess that means if you own a gun illegally or you do something illegally pertaining to firearms, you don't just cop a fine. Like, you have to go to jail for that sort of thing. And that could potentially be a good idea. I haven't really thought about this rather than right now. I mean, you don't want people to be fucking around with guns too much. But it would depend, like, what exactly does that mean? What does a firearm offence mean? Again, that's kind of vague. It's like someone left his gun out and about where someone could have grabbed it, therefore he has to go to jail, or someone spilt bullets on the ground and he forgot to pick them up. Is that a firearms offence? I don't know what that means. It sounds good on paper, but I'd have to get the specifics of what that actually means. Otherwise, it's going to be like the drug war thing where you're just abusing people for minor crimes. Now, there's a lot more to the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party than what I've just read out. So if I have a look at a couple of other things here, we can see that in New South Wales, they're interested in regional healthcare, water management, society and service delivery, safeguarding your environment, payroll tax and commercial stamp duty. They want to get rid of that. But it is something I want to focus on, guns in particular, because I believe that is something that is completely lacking in the Australian political environment. Everyone seems very opposed to it. I'm very glad that the shooters, fishers and farmers have won 3 seats in the New South Wales Parliament and can begin lobbying for increased protection for law-abiding citizens. I'll link to their official website down below in the description, and you can go check it out yourself. They have a lot of PDFs of their various policies. Go in, have a read, have some fun with it, and make up your own mind. Alrighty, let's get back to the analysis. So you may recall me saying that the changing in voting between 2015 and 2019, who's actually in the Legislative Assembly, is a very interesting dynamic, and I'm going to go ahead and explain that now. So if you have a look at the current distribution of seats as of now, again, we've got about 19% of the votes that still need to be counted, so there could be a shift, but for now, let's just assume this is what it's going to be. So we can see down below that 47 votes as a majority are required to pass legislation. And if we have a look, the Liberal and National Coalition has 48 seats, so they can basically put through whatever they want. They've got the majority government. So what exactly does the Australian Labor Party do if they want to pass a piece of legislation? Because they've only got 36 seats to the Coalition's 48. Well, the Greens often line up with the Labor Party, so we can basically say that the so-called left has 39 votes. So what happens if they want to try and top out the Coalition? Well, they're going to have to try and sway a Coalition senator, or member, I should say, from their side to cross the floor, so to speak. But something interesting that they're also going to have to do is they're also going to have to wine and dine the shooters and fishers, because the shooters and fishers now hold as much power as the Greens do within the Legislative Assembly of New South Wales. Additionally, they'll also have to wine and dine 3 independents who may have wildly different stances on policy to any of the major parties, which is probably why they were elected. So this creates a bit of a problem for the Australian Labor Party, as they're going to be trying to please essentially 3 different groups of minor parties. Can they essentially juggle these 3 plates, is what I'm trying to say. Because what the Greens want and what the shooters and fishers want is often totally opposite to one another. The shooters and fishers have remarked that they're not too keen on the Greens' environmental policies, whereas the Greens are actually quite keen on that sort of thing. So how the Australian Labor Party is going to go ahead balancing this whining and dining they have to do in order to pass through their legislation is going to be very interesting. They could end up a very hamstrung movement for the next 8 years. So whilst it's absolutely objectively true that the Coalition has lost power in New South Wales between the 2015 and the 2019 election, and they only now have a single seat majority, I don't believe they're doomed as a political movement due to the aforementioned potential infighting between Labor and the other minority parties. It's true to say that the New South Wales election has been following the trend of the rest of the nation. The major parties are losing support, whilst the minor parties are gaining support, and in this they're gaining a disproportionate amount of power within places such as the Legislative Assembly or the Senate, because what essentially happens is, as the major parties lose support, their numbers get closer and closer. If we have a look at the Australian Senate, just quickly, we can see that the Liberal Coalition holds 31 seats, whilst the Labor Party holds 26. Now, the Greens often vote along party lines with the Labor, so we can say that they essentially have 35 seats. Now, that's pretty damn close. So in order to get policy through, you have to wine and dine the crossbench, which is where you have quite a diverse. We have 19 seats on the crossbench to win. 9 of those are the Green Party, which often vote with the opposition. But take that away, you've got 10 seats to wine and dine. And I think this is really great, because you don't necessarily need a huge amount of senators or people in the Legislative Assembly in order to get what you want, because these people have a disproportionate amount of power in that they need to be wined and dined by the major parties in order to get policy through. But if we have a look at the voting patterns between 2015 and 2019, we can see the Coalition has lost 3.64% of its votes, which is very interesting, whilst the Labor Party has lost 0.74%, the Greens have lost 1%, and the star of the show, the shooters and fishers, have gained 3.47% of the vote, which is quite extraordinary. We can see the other minor parties such as the Lib Dems, small business and that sort of thing. Conservatives got about 0.5%, Lib Dems got about 0.22%, small business 0.7%, animal justice 0.1%. So you can see like between about a 0.5 to a 1.5% increase for almost every minor party. A lot more support for the shooters and fishers, but a general decrease and a drawing away, a siphoning of votes from the major parties. Now, I like this trend quite a bit. I don't like the Australian major parties at all. I don't believe they're actually interested in giving us freedom or anything like that, and that's quite important to me as a libertarian. So I'm much more supportive of parties that actually like freedom, like Senator Fraser Anning, like the Liberal Democrats, and like the Shooters and Fishers. It's good to see Australia finally picking up steam along with the rest of the Western world in its support for right-wing populism, and a general trend towards more freedom for the population. I hope and predict that this trend will continue in the national election later on this year in May. Either the major parties will be slowly chipped away at, or as this happens, they'll realise what is happening and sort of shape up and turn into something actually worth voting for. Who knows? Might even end up putting Fraser Anning first, just so everyone freaks out when he gets 5%. That would be pretty damn funny. At the moment, I'm leaning towards supporting Liberal Democrats all the way through. As it stands, I'd really like to hear your feedback in the comments. I'd like to know, both as an insider, as an Australian or a New South Welshman, or even someone overseas, how you perceive this election. Is it a generally good thing? Is it a generally bad thing? Am I on the ball with my Shooters and Fishers analysis, or is it completely trash? I'd love to hear your feedback. Say what you want down in the comments, I'll have a look, and thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.